Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Yay! Hi, everybody. My name is Donna Pickett, and I am a member of the Al-Anon Family Fellowship. Hi. I want to tell you, I love alcoholics. I am so proud of this conference you've put together, and that it's a conference-approved conference. You know, y'all just need a lot of encouragement on that and a lot of congratulations. I am so pleased to be here. I want to thank the committee for asking me and the conference for putting this together, and especially Marilyn and Maureen and Lorraine for being my hostesses and taking care of me and making sure I got where I was supposed to be. Thank you all so much. You know, back home we have conferences, but they're not conference-approved conferences, and I'm pretty vocal about that. And so I am really encouraged by what you put together here, and that it's all year long work in progress. So I'm going to take that home and see what I can do with it. We got here Wednesday, but we have, I attend meetings at Lake Whitney, Texas, the Lake Whitney Family Group. And I also attend a lot of open AA meetings. Monday night and Thursday night are Al-Anon meetings. Tuesday night is our line-by-line books, big book study. It's an open AA meeting I attend. And I learn about our history. And I learn about how the big book works in my life. And then Wednesday night is an open women's AA, and I attend that. And Saturday night, speaker night, and I like to go to that too. So I attend as many of those meetings as I can. I believe in service. I'm the DR for our group. I sponsor people. I have a step study group in my home on Tuesday mornings. And I love this program. I love it. It has given my family back to me. It has given me a life worth living. And it is so much better than anything I could have imagined in the beginning. Thank you for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When we got here, we haven't ever been here. My friend Leah came with me. You know, she's taking care of me and making sure I get where I need to get and driving so that I don't drive off the road while I'm looking. Because I want to see everything. She's really a trooper to come with me. And she's my best buddy, you know. And she's, can I say it? She's AA, guys, and I'm Al-Anon, and we're best buds. And I do respect the anonymity of all AA members, and I always ask permission before I give it. I asked my husband before I came, was it all right if I shared part of his story and what happened with him and me and how it worked together? And he said, anything that will help the families of alcoholics, he's all for. So I want to thank him, even though he's not here. We went to Aspen last year, and he'd had a heart attack earlier. It's been a couple years, but he hadn't been up high, and he got really sick up there. We went to the Joy of Living conference up there, and it was super, and it was in the fall, and the trees were changing, and I'm sure it's a lot like that here in the fall, but he got really sick and ended up in the hospital, so he couldn't come with me. And he just didn't really, I think he has some untreated Al-Anonism, because he just didn't trust me to come here by myself that I would be okay. So therefore, Leah volunteered to come with me and make sure everything was fine. But we haven't been here, and we wanted to see everything. And I want to tell you, back home, I grew up in the panhandle of Texas. I was born in Amarillo, Texas, grew up in Dumas, Texas, and around that area. And we have a canyon up near Amarillo called Palo Duro Canyon. And it's a pretty awesome place for us up there. But it's like a baby compared to your Grand Canyon. We took the helicopter tour, and we were just awe-inspired. It reminded us, we were talking about it, how how huge God's universe is and how tiny we are, what a little part of it is, and how easy it is for us to get into our ego and think we're something special, and we're not. We're just a tiny little part of the universe, and yet we're just as important to God as anything else. And that's the God of my understanding, and I think that's pretty awesome too, because y'all taught me that. But I've just been real impressed with everything I've seen here. It's just magnificent. We love it. We want to come back and stay longer. You know, I want to compliment Teresa. I don't know where she is, but she did such a wonderful job last night. You know, and she didn't get to wear her fancy clothes, and so I brought fancy clothes, but I dressed for cold weather, so it's a little warm up here. But they taught me I need to dress out of respect for you and for my program that saved my life. So I do that. And, you know, following Teresa and Lexi is like, I can get into my Al-Anon defects of character and into that, oh, okay, what am I doing here? And I'm not good enough. And, you know, those old tapes, they come up sometimes. And then I have to remember recovery. Because I have the disease, the family disease of alcoholism. And it affects every facet of my life. And I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, because that's how it felt in the alcoholism. It felt that way. And it was that way. I didn't know there was hope. I didn't have any hope. You know, what I felt was obsession. You know, what's he doing? Where is he? Anxiety. Oh, what's going to happen next? The anger, the denial, the fear, the feelings of guilt and shame. I felt rejected and alone, and I just felt despair at a deep level. You know, alcohol annihilated everything worthwhile in our lives to where our family was just existing. We were not a happy crew. You know, I think that our family disease is just like the disease that alcoholics have, in that there's 3 things that happen to us. If we're left untreated, we end up in institutions, dead, or we get in recovery. Those are our only choices. And you will find us in hospitals and mental health institutions, suicide. You know, and I've knocked on all those doors and opened most of them. You know, in recovery, I don't have to do that anymore. You know, I was born in Amarillo. I want to give you just a little background so you know a little bit about me. My mother was a teacher. My father was an engineer. And they got married after the war. And my mother was a Solomon, which, if you don't know, that's a Jewish name, even though she doesn't practice Judaism. And my father's name was Bossler, and that's a German name, and he's of German descent. And I always thought that was kind of interesting after I thought about it, you know, that the 2 of them got together after the World War II, and they were in their 40s and didn't know if they could have children or not, and here I came. So I was their little miracle baby. But, you know, being born to parents that are that much older is kind of rough because they're pretty set in their ways. And I felt like growing up that Mother wanted me to be her doll. She liked to dress me, pose me. You know, I was supposed to be on display when I was asked, and the rest of the time I was not supposed to make any noise or be seen or heard. And I started to rebel against that early on in life, before I even started school. She had, have you ever seen those really long curls? You know, my mother loved those curls because I have naturally curly hair, and it's, you know, sometimes rather disobedient. But she rolled my hair in those long curls, and I didn't like them, and the kids made fun of me. But they were her curls, and she wanted them. So I went down to my little friend's house and had her cut them off. I came home and opened the door, and my mother said, "Where are my curls?" I told her. She went and got them. But that kind of is an example of my relationship with my mother. One of the things I like to do when I start finding the God of my understanding is write about my mother's God, my father's God, my church's God, and anybody else who influenced my idea of who God is. And I take those beliefs and separate them and look at what do I believe, what is true for me. For Mother, it was, being seen. We had our seat in the church. We're supposed to be there at all a certain times. She played the piano. She was a wonderful, accomplished lady. She was Woman of the Year and all that kind of stuff, but and she wanted me to follow in her footsteps, and that was just not me. She wanted a little girl, and I was a little tomboy. The only good thing I can say right now is, thinking about it, is that I would bring all sorts of critters home, and she would let me keep them, outside, of course, but frogs and dogs and cats, every picture of me as a little child has a dog, and I'm a dog person, so I love this conference that you have your dogs here. I left mine at home, and it's kind of rough being away from them, They do practice unconditional love, and it's a wonderful thing to have a pet and experience that kind of love. But Mother was very critical. She wanted me to be a little girl, and I wasn't. I was a tomboy. She wanted me to do all kinds of things that just weren't in the cards. So we fought, and I rebelled, and that was just the story of our relationship. The thing about it is that it set me up for a lot of things to happen later. My father, on the other hand, he was the kind of guy, he would go mow the lawn at the church and wouldn't tell anybody. And he believed in the sanctity of life. One time I brought home these little spiders. This particular spider had 6 legs, so I thought it was an insect, but I couldn't find it in my book. And somebody else looked at it and said, that's a black widow you're playing with. So I had her in a jar, and she laid eggs, and so I couldn't, they wanted to kill her, these other people, and I didn't want that to happen. So my daddy took her and set her out somewhere in the country and let her go. That's an example of my dad. So it was a loving home. They did their very best for me, but it was also very oppressive. And I was supposed to act like an adult, and I was just a child. And when I do things that children do, I got in a lot of trouble. So by the time I was 15 years old, I was looking for love in all the wrong places. Anyway, I met this fellow, and we got together, and his name is Gordon. And I've been with him for, let's see now, we got married in 67. I think that's 43 years now. We had an anniversary in April. And anyway, he was my high school sweetheart, and we got together, and we decided to get married. We have good friends that were married in high school, and we both wanted out of the house, and that was a way to get it. And at the time, it just seemed like we were in heat and we needed to be together. But, we crossed the state line and we got married. And he was a couple years ahead of me in school, so we moved to Lubbock for him to go to Texas Tech, and I finished high school at Lubbock High. So it was while we were in Lubbock that, people drink in college. It's a social thing. We did that. I drank with him. His drinking was a little different than mine, but, we drank together. And then we had a mobile home that we'd bought that we were living in while we were going to school, and we had a fire. And the guys came and they said, it'll probably take 2 or 3 weeks to fix it. And our insurance didn't cover much, and we didn't have a place to live, and our next door neighbor was divorced. He was single, and he had the mobile home next door, and he said, well, y'all just come live with me, which was great. It was a very generous offer. But we moved in, Gordon and I, and by that time we had a little baby. I started college, but I wanted that baby. So we had a child, and all 3 of us moved in with Bill. And he was kind of used to living by himself, but he put up with us. The thing is, when he came home, every night he would have a couple beers. And he was a daily drinker, and he'd have a couple and he'd quit. He didn't have any problem with that, and I don't have any problem with drinking if you can handle it. But my husband also started doing that, and we marked that as when his daily drinking started. And it just increased, and it got worse. And because of my relationships with my parents growing up, especially my mother, he would tell me that if I didn't do this, then he wouldn't have to drink. If only I would do this, it would be okay. So I tried to do all the if onlys, but I couldn't get it right. Until it came one day that he got out his winter jacket and it had a button off of it. And that was his excuse to drink. And it was a dawning of awakening for me that, I haven't even seen that jacket. I didn't know if the button was missing. He never told me. He's just using that for an excuse. But it was really hard not to take responsibility for what was happening in my family, and I didn't know any better. My parents didn't drink. We weren't around drinking at all. So I felt like I was to blame. And I took all that guilt and shame and internalized it as my own. And he was real good at that manipulation, and I call it gas. And that's what what an alcoholic uses to manipulate, and Al-Anons learn it too, is the guilt, the anger, and the silence and the shame. If the guilt didn't work, he'd move to anger, it'd get loud. And then if that didn't work, he'd start on the shame, and then, slam the door and leave, and I'd be left with silence and all those feelings. And I wouldn't, I got to where I couldn't talk. I would be thinking in my head, okay, if I say this, he's going to say that, and then he's going to hurt me with this. And I would go through that scenario to where I couldn't hardly talk. I was afraid to say anything. And it just got worse and worse. And we were living in Fort Worth at the time. And he was working for, he was a food science major in industrial foods, and he was working for Foremost Dairies. But his buddy was working over at Miller Brewing and told him he has a much better job over there. So he applied, and they took him in, and he went to work there. And they had beer on tap. You could have beer on break. Everybody drank at work. And for an alcoholic, he thought he died and gone to heaven. For me and the family, our relationships began to disintegrate even more quickly. He was working midnights at the time, and after work, they would go to some bar and drink some more. And when he got home, he was pretty sloppy drunk. And sloppy drunks are not attractive to Al-Anons, not to me anyway. And the feeling that I had was just that I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was afraid when the phone rang. I didn't know if he was going to make it home at night. It was like, I think you need to take out more insurance in case something happens to you. And on the other hand, I didn't know what to do if he didn't show up on time. I would get scared. It was like, I didn't want him to be there, and I didn't know what I'd do if he wasn't there. It's loving the person and hating the disease, but at the time I didn't know that. I just knew that I was confused, I was scared, and I was lonely. Well, he'd always kind of wanted to live in the country, so I decided that if we bought a farm, he might get better. So we made a geographic cure, and we moved to Hill County, bought a little farm there. And when we moved there, I didn't know a single soul, and I was totally isolated. There wasn't anyone there that I knew. It was just a feeling of total isolation, loneliness, despair. The drinking was getting worse. I was doing the bills, and I was so careful to make sure that the bills were paid and there was money to cover them. And he was writing checks for booze, and there wasn't any money when my checks hit. And one of them ended up at the DA's office, and I didn't get the letter because it disappeared. And so I had to go take care of that, and I felt ashamed. That I had a sponsor then that told me that I was responsible. I could take care of that. I could separate an account that was just mine so that wouldn't happen. But I didn't have any money of my own. It was all his. So I kind of had to do what he wanted to do if I wanted to keep getting any money. So I didn't do that, but I experienced a lot of shame about money. So when we got there, and my loneliness and despair became, I didn't think it could get any worse. I didn't know what to do, but I started looking for a solution. And at that time, they had those commercials on TV about treatment centers and alcoholism. And I hadn't really thought of that as a problem. I thought it was me. He told me, I believed him. Anyway, I thought, well, you know, there is a lot of drinking around here. That could be part of the problem. So I ended up going to the Council on Alcoholism and sat down and talked to a fella. And he kind of suggested I might need Al-Anon, and I'd never heard of it before. Never heard of it in my life. So he put me in touch with some people over in Whitney. I lived about 45 minutes away if the train wasn't running. So I got over there. Well, no, I didn't get there. Actually, he put me in touch with some ladies, and they called me and said, we will meet you here because you will never find our clubhouse if we don't take you. Because that was in 1978, and it was back when Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon were very anonymous. So I drove to meet them, and there were two ladies that met me. And then they drove me to the end of a dirt road to a little place that used to be a fishing lodge kind of place. And people parked 2 blocks away so nobody would know they were there. And I walked into this building, and it was dark, they were smoking, everybody was hugging and kissing, and my thoughts were, oh my God, what have I gotten into? Anyway, they took a look at me and they said, you need to go upstairs, honey. And that's where the Al-Anons were. So I get upstairs, and there's a few women there, and they're having a little meeting. And there was one woman that started talking about her husband. And he was one of those that didn't make it. He was drinking and had a wreck, and he was killed in that wreck. Now, my husband's driving from Fort Worth to Hillsborough, and that's about 60 miles around, one way. And my greatest fear was that he was going to kill someone on that road, and that he might kill himself, but worse yet, he might kill someone innocent on that road driving drunk. And I felt responsible, but I also felt powerless. The only thing I knew to do was to turn him into the police, and I couldn't do that because he was the only support for my children, and I had 2 boys by then that I had no means of supporting. So I carried the shame about that. If something happened, I would have a part in it. She started talking about her husband and how he had a wreck and he was killed, and it hit that fear that I had, and I went to the bathroom. That was my safe place. Shut the door, and so I could cry in private because I wouldn't share my feelings outside because someone would take them and use them and hurt me with them. And they were wise to that maneuver, so they came and knocked on the door and told me to come out of the bathroom, and they gave me permission to cry in the meeting, and I did that. And the other thing I remember is on the way home, back to my car, the 2 ladies told me that it was okay to say no. That was a complete sentence because I didn't know that. I didn't have that tool at that time. And there were some things going on I needed to say no to. So that was the first tool I got in Al-Anon. Well, I was fortunate that in our group, they worked the steps. So they got me, I got a sponsor, and she started me on the steps. The first step, how am I powerless over alcohol? That was pretty obvious. And how was my life unmanageable? I'll tell you a few stories about that. One was Gordon was driving home one night, one morning actually, after he'd worked all night, called me and said he was too drunk to get home. So I piled the boys in the car, and they were 4 and 8 at that time, drove to the highway where he was parked on the side of the road, and told him, we could leave the car because he was too drunk to drive, and we'd come back in and get it later. And he said, no, we can't do that because it'll get vandalized. So he wouldn't get out of the car. And my 4-year-old said he had to go with Daddy to keep Daddy safe. So he crawled in Daddy's car, and I couldn't get him out. And the other one, he's just kind of mad about the whole thing and the craziness in the family, and we all had our sickness. So we ended up driving home. Gordon was driving his car, too drunk to drive. My child was in the car with him, taking care of him. My other child was in the car saying what a crazy family this was, and he couldn't wait to get out of it. That's the family disease. We had a couple of games that we played, and one was Jump Over Daddy, and the other one's Look for Daddy. Jump Over Daddy is, Daddy was never really mean to the kids. He just told, they had to be quiet when he was sleeping during the day, but he would get in the floor to play with him. He'd pass out, so we would play Jump Over Daddy. You got points if you hit Daddy when you jumped over. But my Al-Anonism kicked in, and I would get him a pillow and a blanket when we were through playing. The others looked for Daddy. And the last time we looked for Daddy, it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. The bars were closed. He should have been home. He wasn't home. He hadn't called. He wasn't answering the phone. I went to look for him. I piled my 2 little babies in the car at, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We're driving down the freeway, and I have one child looking on this side in the ditches for Daddy, and the other one looking on that side for Daddy. Daddy's probably had a wreck, and we need to find him. Now, that's pretty unmanageable. Can you imagine the fear that I put into those kids about their daddy being injured or dead? But that was the unmanageability in our life. And then I want to tell you about the 60-day wonder. Unmanageability doesn't stop when we get in recovery. He'd been sober about 60 days, and on this little farm that we bought, we had some cows, and they were alcoholic cows. They were unmanageable, I tell you. And we had a little string of electric wire. Well, one day they got out, and we couldn't find them. And then some guy called and said, your cows are on my property. So Gordon and I and the 2 babies piled in the car to go get the cows. We had a trailer, and we didn't know what we were going to do. We get over there, and they're in this creek bed. The cows are in this creek bed. The creek bed is full of snakes. And Daddy says, we're going to chase them down here. So here we are, me and the kids and Gordon chasing cows down the creek bed, and the snakes are running. They're scared of us. So we get out of there, and we can't get the cows in the trailer because we've just got a little rope corral there. So this one cow won't go where he wants, and so Gordon decides to punch him in the head. Well, it's not a good thing. The cow has a hard head. So we did get the calves in the truck or the trailer, and they started following us, and we were driving home. And as we're driving home, Gordon says, I think I may have broke my hand. So that's the 60-day wonder. That's how recovered we were. He didn't get into AA he got into AA. I came in 78. He got there in 82, but it took him to 84 to get sober and stay sober. So we had a lot of stuff going on in that period of time, but that was the unmanageability in our lives. Step 2, the power greater than us. For me, it was about learning to surrender. I'd prayed all those prayers about God do this, God do that. But this time, what I was learning was to let go and let God, what it really meant, not to fix. And I got to a point where I was truly surrendered, and I said to God, God, I just can't take anymore. Something has to change. I was just, I was in a place so deep and dark, I didn't know if I could ever get out. And I didn't think I could live that way anymore, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew it had to change. And I knew the next day that God had answered my prayer. Because when Gordon got to work that morning, Gordon worked that night, and the next day, they called him in and they said, we want you to go to treatment. So God took care of it in a way that was a whole lot better than anything I could have done, because they wanted to keep him because he was a good employee, and it talks about that in the big book. Most alcoholics are. They're good, intelligent people, but they have a disease.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
And they wanted him to stay, but they sent him to treatment. And it was basically just a detox. And he came home and bought beer on the way home. When he was in treatment, all I could do was cry. Well, and course, the family knew, but the family didn't know. It was not out in the open. We didn't talk about it. It was, just, we didn't talk about it. Everybody knew it, but we didn't talk about it. My parents said, leave the bum. His parents said, if you'd only do this, he might not need to drink. So there was no support there. They meant well, but they didn't know anything about the disease. What time is it? Oh, I got to hurry up. So, I was taught a prayer about, God, just teach me to trust. And I could do it one tiny baby step at a time, and that was the first step. And it turned out better than anything I could have imagined, better for everyone. And I began to trust that and turn things over to God. And every time that I surrendered it, it turned out better than anything I could have imagined. And step 2 also gave me the gift of awareness. And I believe that's a gift from God, because it comes to me and I don't know from where, and I didn't know it before. I think it's a gift from God, and I learned how to be still. I learned how to turn off that thing in my head that just kept rolling around. Step 3, made a decision. When I came to that step, somehow I connected it with step 11, but I didn't know that. I needed to know what God's will was, so I would know what to do with that. And they just told me to work the rest of the steps, and I made a commitment to go to meetings. And back then, where I lived, to a meeting, it was 45 minutes to an hour to get to a meeting. And I had a little Volkswagen that I didn't know if it'd make it across town and back. And I didn't have a babysitter for the boys because we were isolated, but I'd drag them along with me. And there was another little room next to the Al-Anon room, and they would go in there, and my oldest one would read the literature, and they would either read, color, or fight. And sometimes they would stay in the car because we had the windows open and I could hear them down there, and they liked to stay in the car and I could hear them. And sometimes they were good, sometimes it got kind of loud. And some people said, you need to find a babysitter. And other people were welcoming to my children. So I have a real heart for people who come in with children, that they are part of our family. And, our children don't have a choice about this. And they're the ones who suffer most in the family disease, I think. So I have a real heart for them. When I was growing up and a young woman, what I wanted was a lot of children in a happy home, and I didn't have that. And I really wanted to be a good parent, and I wasn't a good parent. And my commitment was to learn how to do that. And they have a little brochure in Al-Anon saying, it says, how can I help my children? And it said, if I do what's best for me, it's probably going to be best for my children. And I knew that if I came for that hour twice a week, that I could live the rest of the week and be a better parent. And I made a commitment to do that and be the best parent I could be and try to learn about that. They have a natural tolerance for their father. They knew that he was sick, and they loved him anyway. But they didn't understand what was wrong with me and why I was not emotionally available and why I screamed and yelled and why I was so angry. They didn't understand that. And I wanted to recover. I didn't want to be in that. Step 4. My sponsor gave me one of those 27-page inventories. It asked me questions about things that I really didn't even know people did. And I started on it, and I was answering all the questions. And then my sponsor had the audacity to move. She left me. And I was in the middle of this 4-step. And it probably took me, after she left, a year to finish it. I finished it, and I was in a lot of pain, but there wasn't anybody in that Al-Anon room I wanted to share it with. And I hear some people say that, so I'm going to share this. When I went in the Al-Anon room, I was not real comfortable with what I found there. And I know today that that's part of our defense, that we become the controlling, respectable. We have to look good and everything has to be in order. And if you don't look good, we're going to tell you, and, that kind of person. And that's part of recovery for Al-Anons. But that's what I felt, because I'm very sensitive to that. And I felt that when I walked in the room, and I didn't want to be there. But I did find some women that had recovery and that could love unconditionally. And they gave me that love that I didn't have. And when I got in so much pain that I needed to give away my fifth step, it was to an alcoholic woman named Betty. And I'll tell you just a little bit about Betty and her kindness to me. You know, I had that car, I did nothing make it. Well, she started inviting me to drive with them from Hillsborough to the meeting, and I did that. And she did something else. My husband was still drinking, and she invited us into her home. And that's when I started to feel a part of. And that's a practice I have at my home. I invite newcomers into my home. And, you know, it's a blessing to me, but I want them to feel a part of. And I gave Betty, I made an appointment with Betty to give away my fifth step. And my husband said something to me about the date. And I said, well, I've got something planned. He said, well, that's our anniversary. And I said, well, this is the most important thing I can do for our family. And I went and did my fifth step on my anniversary that year. And when I'd finished telling her all the things I wanted to tell her, she looked at me and she said, I think there's something else you haven't shared with me. And there was. And it was about when I was a little girl and I'd been raped by a neighbor. And I was so afraid to tell my parents that I'd never told them, and it continued to happen. And I'd taken in all the shame about that. And I'd carried it with me all those years and never said it, because I knew if I said it, you wouldn't love me anymore and nobody would have anything to do with me, because that's the shame that I felt. And she helped me with that. She told me some stories about her family, and it became okay. The next thing was step 6, and it's for me about a change of heart. After I'd done the fifth step, I'd been hurt so much, and I recognized where I had hurt others, that was the change of heart that I asked God to have in me, that I would no longer do things that hurt other people, that would be my measuring stick about what I do, that I no longer was so selfish that I didn't think about what I did and how it affected others. And I have a shorthand for the disease. The disease says, I want what I want, and I don't care who it affects or what happens. And recovery says, I want what God wants. And whatever that is, it's okay. Step 7 was about my defects of character, and I like to think about them as defenses. I'm very sensitive, and I had a lot of criticism growing up in my life, and what that did to me was made me think that you were judging me, and because of that, I developed some defense mechanisms. I was pretty good in school, and so arrogance was one of them. Sloth, gluttony, pride, envy, jealousy, I had them all. I knew they were there. And she told me I needed to pick one and work on it, and I chose criticism. Our Just for Today says, I will not criticize one little bit. So that was the one I was going to work on. And in Al-Anon, they say if you choose one thing and work on it, your life will change. So that was the one I chose to work on. I'm still working on it, by the way. And I came up with the 3 C's, that I wasn't going to compare, criticize, or compete with anybody else. Not that I don't do it, but today I'm aware of it when I do it and I change it. So, change of heart. I asked God to remove those defects of character, and I chose one to work on. 8 was about attitude, becoming willing to make amends. My belief is that if I'm not right in my heart, if I'm not at peace in my heart, then when I go to make an amends, my attitude's going to speak long before I get the words out of my mouth. So I have to be right in my heart. I have to forgive the other person. I have to forgive myself. And I have to be willing to go to any length. But it begins with my work in me. So that when I went to make those amends, I want to tell you about a couple of them. One of them was to my husband, that I blamed him. That's one of our diseases, is blaming. I'd put all the blame on him and his drinking that was wrong with our family. And I made amends to him, and I said I was wrong to blame him for everything that was wrong in our family. And that I was going to take responsibility for my part. And it was like a weight was lifted off his shoulders. I could just see it. He took a big breath, and it was just like something was released in him. And the other amends I want to tell you about was to one of my sons. I was not really emotionally available to my children because I was too obsessed with my alcoholic. And I was so angry that it was just coming out of me. And one time we were going into the barn and Greg was behind me and he was young. And I got pushed. And I thought that he had pushed me and I turned around and slapped him as hard as I could. And then I saw the look in his face. He had tripped. And I had hurt him. And I felt so bad for doing that. And that was my disease coming out again. And the last thing I wanted to do was hurt my children, and I did that a lot. So I made amends to them. Now, Greg, he was a hard one to make amends for. I went to him, I offered my amends, and I offered to let him tell me anything he wanted to, and he wouldn't do that. And I'll get to that later if I have time. But those were just a couple of the amends I needed to make. 10 is I try to practice my program every day. I read the literature. I try to know what it says. If I say something, it's from the literature. We have the step study, tradition study, concept study in my home every Tuesday. We use the Pathways to Recovery. That's a deep book. I read it a lot. It's like the big book to me. And I go to a big book study to know our history. I'm committed to the program. I practice it to the best of my ability every day as I ask God to help me, and I go and do the best I can. Step 11. In step 2, I learned to be still. Learned to quiet those noises in my head. And step 11 for me was about intention. It was about seeking. My intention was to be with God. And one of the amends I needed to make was to God. Because I had blamed him. I had ignored him. And what was in my heart now was, I've been given love through this program. How do I give it back to God? And so I asked God that question. He said, love my children. And you are all his children. And I know that we need to stay connected to our source. And I do that to the best of my ability too. I invite God into everything I do. I try to practice the principles in my everyday life. A principle is a rule of conduct. Practice means I do it. I put it into action. First, I have to know the principles, and then I have to apply them. I have to put them into action in my daily life and everything I do. So we worked the steps to the best of our ability. My husband got sober. The first year he got sober, I was going back to school. I had reclaimed some dreams that I'd lost in alcoholism. And one of them was education. I didn't want to be in the place where I couldn't afford to do anything. At one point, the kids said to me, Mom, why did you stay? They knew I ought to leave, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't support myself, much less them, and I didn't want to be in that position anymore. I wanted to have choices. So I'd gone back to school. I got my associate's degree when my husband was in treatment. He wasn't even there. Then I was working on my bachelor's, and I got sick, and things happened, and I got pregnant. And there was a problem with the pregnancy, and I wasn't aware of it until I went to the doctor, and he said that I needed to terminate the pregnancy. And at that point in time, I still had black and white thinking that all or nothing that we have in the disease, that it was right or wrong, and I thought it was wrong. And he was telling me that I didn't have any choice because if I didn't do it, I would die. So he gave me 24 hours if I promised to be back at the hospital the next day. So I did, and I went home, and I had to deal with that. And I talked to everybody that had ideas from left to right. But in the end, I talked to my pastor, and he told me that, my life is more important than just that tiny little bit I see, because God uses me in the universe. I have 2 children. I taught Sunday school. I have a husband who needed me. And he said God gave us the doctor's wisdom so that we can make better choices. And that's something we learn in Al-Anon, get good information, make good choices. Anyway, he made it okay for me to go. But when I woke up, I still hadn't dealt with it in my consciousness. And I felt like I'd murdered my child. And I went into a really deep depression. And my family had to deal with that. So I went into the institutions trying to get better. And at one point, Gordon was working nights, and my oldest son had left by then. He got out of the house as soon as possible. And the youngest one was home by himself. He was probably maybe 15. And there was a night that Gordon worked in Fort Worth. He's 60 miles away. I'm in an institution. I can't get out. And there was a storm, tornadoes, and hail that was baseball size, breaking the windows. And Greg was in the house by himself in a mobile home, and he had a football helmet on his head, hoping that the house didn't get blown away. And I couldn't get to him. And, that was in recovery. And when I was in that depression, I had people in the program tell me, if only you would work your steps, you would feel better. If you'd work your program, you'd be well. That's not true. I was working the program, and I was dealing with what came up, and there was some pretty tough stuff in my background I had to deal with. But for me, I had said a prayer about, God, help me to be all I can be as soon as I can be. And somebody said that's a real brave prayer. And as it turned out, I learned a lot about myself, got well a lot faster than I probably would have any other way with the help of professionals. And my family went to counseling, and we learned some tools that we didn't have. And I want to talk to you a little bit about recovery. When we got in recovery, our family was a mess. And so we decided to have family meetings. And we practiced the traditions in those meetings. And we sat down and we told the kids that everybody was going to have an opportunity to speak. No one would interrupt them. And that there would be no recriminations for what was said. They could say whatever they wanted to, and we would not punish them in any way for that. And we told them that we are all equal here, that our feelings are equally important, and our thoughts are equally important, but we have different roles and responsibilities. And we sat down and we had a meeting, and those two boys told us a lot of heavy things. And they were really angry with us, and they told us all the things they didn't like about what we were doing. And we had to sit and listen. And that was recovery for us. And we invited God into that meeting and asked him to be in charge. And he was. After a couple meetings, the boys were done. They told us how angry they were, and they were through with all that stuff. And it took us a lot longer to deal with it. Now, we didn't have Alateen. The boys wanted it, so I couldn't find an Alateen sponsor, so I became an Alateen sponsor, and they went to Alateen. And I took them we have West TAC there, and it's the district conference. I took them to that. Later on in life, my eldest son was a speaker at the conference. They learned the program through us. They got a little bit of Alateen. My youngest one sat on his father's lap in AA the whole time he was there. They got it kind of by osmosis. We worked the traditions. They knew what we were doing. We sat down and we made family goals. I had learned that I didn't have any choices because I didn't have any education. So we had a family goal that I was going to go to school and get a degree so I could get a job so that we could support them when they got to that age. And that's what I did. I went back to school so I could get an education. And the kids were supportive of that because they knew it was for the family. And we made education very important. And I kept going to school till I got my master's. I got a master's in counseling psychology and worked as an art therapist. The boys went to college. They worked their way through, and we helped them as much as we could. And today, they're still working on their education. My oldest son just graduated from law school. He's now a lawyer. And the youngest one will get his master's in business in August. So that's a family tradition that keeps going, and they have more choices now. They will always have choices. That's a gift we've given to them that nobody can take away. I got really sick. I was working, and I got really sick. I had had knee surgery, and I got blood clots. And by the time I got to the hospital, the clots had broken loose and gone to my lungs. And then I had a massive clot that broke loose and blocked the aorta to the heart. And they put me in ICU. And they told the family, they said, "We've done everything we can do. If you believe in prayer, now's the time, because there's nothing else left to do." And it just so happened that I went into ICU on a Friday, and they left, I was going there to die. That's what they expected. They couldn't do anything else. And we always go to a conference called the Brazos Conference, and it started that Friday. And at every meeting, they had a silent prayer for me. And on Sunday, I came out of ICU when the conference ended. And that's the power of prayer in this organization. You know, the prayer works. And, you know, there's a lot of people in here that I have to thank for that. When I went home, I had to have somebody with me 24 hours a day, because if a clot broke loose, I might not be able to help myself. So the people from the club got together and they made a schedule of who would be with me when, and they came and sat with me. And what I want to share about that is I had to learn to receive. I knew how to give, but I had forgotten how to receive, and I learned to receive. And people would come and sit with me, and we would talk about their lives and my life. And I got to know them in a way I never would have had that not happened. And just like so much in my life, like all the alcoholism and everything else, as soon as I can accept it for what it is and be okay with it, you know, it's like God transforms it into something wonderful. And I got to know people in a way I never would have. And it was an amazing thing. And then later, after I got over that, they put me on blood thinners, and my hemoglobin was so low I was bleeding somewhere and they couldn't find it. So they did the female check, and they said that whatever it is, the testing, you know, that it was cancerous and I needed to have all of that taken care of. But at that time, it had been about 6 months since I quit working, and we lived on 2 salaries, and everything that we had saved was gone, and we didn't know how we were going to get there. And I still have that feeling that Al-Anon sometimes get about, you know, I'm really insignificant and unimportant. I know I'm that little speck in the universe, but I didn't think I was important. And we had 2 men that came to us, and they offered to sponsor my trip to Mayo, is where I was going to have the surgery. And they would pay for my transportation, my hotel, the surgery, everything. You know, and it was just a gift from God that came to us. One of them said God had told him that was his marching orders, and he always followed them. But that was, for me, one of those awarenesses that God really does care, and that God's unlimited. He can do anything, anytime. And it helped me to know that I may be small, but I'm important to God, and I'm important to people in the program. So it was pretty, you know, amazing how all of that happened, and all the times that people in the program have come and rescued us, and that we rescue them, and we help one another, and we're there for them. Our home's an open home, and we love the program. It's an amazing gift. You know, just because we're in recovery, it doesn't mean there's not dark days. Things happen. Gordon had a heart attack. Is it time? Okay, it's time to quit. Gordon had a heart attack. A lot of things happened. One more thing I want to tell you. Greg wouldn't let me make amends to him. And when I was laying in that hospital bed in ICU and they didn't think I was going to live, he came in there and he told me why he was afraid to tell me how he felt, because he felt responsible for me breaking down and being depressed and ending up in the hospital and all of that. He thought it was his fault. And he thought if he told me the truth that I would break down and be gone and he would lose me. But he allowed me to make amends to him while I was laying in that bed. Other than that, I was at peace with the world. I had practiced my program, everything. I just felt that peace beyond understanding. I was at peace with the world. I was at peace within me. And, you know, I was okay with whatever God had in store for me. It was fine. Whatever God wanted was okay with me. Since then, our relationship in our family has changed. Our boys call us all the time. They want us to be a part of their family. They want us to be in their home. Greg was had a job in England for a while. They were lonely. They invited us over. We got over there, and they didn't want us to leave. And we had the best time in our life staying with them. We love them, and they love us, and our family has healed. We have recovered from the disease of alcoholism. We are no longer alone, afraid, or angry. So what I want to share with you in closing is that, you know, I know that this program can bring you peace within and peace with the world. And that is my prayer for you, that you find that. When I entered the hospital one time, there was one of those old 24-hour day books, the black ones, and a big print sitting in my room. It shouldn't have been there, but it was. And I opened it up to that day because I'd asked God, I know it doesn't matter, but please help me to understand. I got past the whys, but help me to understand why this has happened, what's going on here. Please give me something. And I opened that book and I read it, and it said, after a while, it will not matter anymore what happens to you. Only that your experience can be used to help others in similar situations. So my prayer for you is that God surrounds you with his light. He enfolds you in his love. He protects you with his power, and that you feel his presence with you all the time in your meetings, in your homes, in your community, that you take what you've been given and share it with the world. Thank you for letting me share. Thank you for being here for me. And I love you, and without this, we wouldn't be here. Thank you again.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.